From Russia's invasion of Ukraine to the Syrian civil war, Arwa Damon has been on the ground reporting on stories from war zones for nearly 2 decades. She has received many awards and recognition for her work, including a Peabody during her time as CNN as a correspondent. But in 2022, Damon decided to leave her job to focus on the nonprofit she founded. It's called the International Network for Aid, Relief and Assistance, known as INARA for short. And their main goal is to help children in war zones or natural disasters. Here's my spotlight conversation with Arwa Damon, and a warning. Some viewers may find the details disturbing. War correspondent and independent journalist Arwa Damon joins me now from Abu Dhabi. Arwa, thanks so much for being here. I know it is very early where you are right now. Listen, I want to start by asking you how you started out as a journalist.
Well, I am Syrian American, and I grew up in a very cross-cultural household. I grew up bilingual. I like to say that, the home atmosphere was both, Lebanon, za'atar, and blueberry pancakes. And I was in New York when 9/11 happened, and it was horrifying and shocking and world-altering to a certain degree, at least, for me and for so many others. And then I was seeing and hearing what was happening post the 9/11 attack, and I was watching this East-West, rift grow. I was seeing and hearing the dehumanizing rhetoric towards Arabs and Muslims. And I decided that I was in a unique position coming from both worlds to be able to try to explain people to each other. And so I basically decided I was going to be a journalist.
So it was 9/11 that really made you decide this is what your path would be?
Very much so. I grew up in Morocco and Turkey, and I was very fortunate to have, a childhood where I was exposed to many different cultures, people from all different kinds of walks of life. And I really just had this sort of visceral need and this really began to sort of amplify itself for me when the US was gearing up to go to war in Iraq, this visceral need to be there, to bear witness and try to, I guess, tell the story of what is often perceived by the West as being the other, and that is the Arab and Muslim world, to a Western audience.
Do you think that is still the case, as it was during 9/11, that, that part of the world is considered the other?
I do very much so, and that's really sad. And I think it goes to show to a certain degree perhaps how we collectively as journalists have failed to a certain degree, because we never really were able to, I guess, make people understand that at our very core, we are all the same. And that seems to be an understanding that is sorely lacking right now. And I distinctly remember, as we were watching the Israeli military gearing up to go into Gaza, and the same dehumanizing rhetoric, the same sort of frantic beating of the war drums. And to me, it shot me straight back to the post 9/11 world. And it really felt as if, we hadn't learned any of the lessons that the post 9/11 world had in theory taught us.
When you look back to Iraq and your time as a war correspondent there, and you look at what is happening now, what do you think the core role of journalists is?
I think we have multiple facets when it comes to what our role is supposed to be. We need to unflinchingly question the powers that are the key players in any conflict. We need to have learned, because this lesson keeps getting taught to us over and over again, that even a government that we would want to instinctively trust, we cannot. We have an extraordinary burden of responsibility towards what I call the emotional story, and that is the story of the civilians that are living out the consequences of the violence. We have an extraordinary burden of responsibility to explain. We need to be giving historical context. We need our viewers to understand, or our readers to understand, how it is that we got to a certain junction in history. with all of the factors that have led to us reaching that certain junction in history. And especially now, when you see journalists or anyone attempt to try to explain what often gets described as a complicated situation, that ends up, resulting in an accusation of somehow justifying a violent act, whereas it's not the case. Educating the population, educating readers, educating viewers is not a justification of things that have happened, but rather an explanation. And if we refuse to understand how it is that we get to certain points in our history, then we're never going to be able to evolve beyond this perpetual cycle of seeing history repeat itself over and over again.
You mentioned civilians, and I know that there's always been a human element in your storytelling. I wonder if there is one story in particular from your time in war zones that stands out to you beyond the others.
The first time I heard pain. I heard pain coming out of a human body that did not sound human. And that was in Samarra in 2004 in Iraq, and I was embedded with the US military at the time. And the battle was over, and we were going with the American troops to the morgue. And on the way there, very close to the gates of the morgue, a woman was walking, and she was wearing her black hijab. And I just heard this scream emanating from her body, from her guts, and it just felt as if it had jumped out of her and was wrapping me in its grip. I mean, it was so intense. And then she collapsed to the ground, and I remember the way that her hijab kind of like tumbled off of her head, and her brown hair sort of fell out of it, and she just lay there on the ground, rocking back and forth, crying out from the very depth of her guts. That was the first time I heard pain, and it definitely wasn't the last.
Just hearing that from you is disturbing. I wonder, how traumatic seeing this, living through all of this has been for you personally as an individual. I know, we all try to have tough skin as a journalist and go out there and tell stories, but it's got to have a personal impact on you. And I wonder how that part of it has been.
I mean, look, of course it does. And I always say to people who sort of comment on, whether or not we become desensitized after doing this for, I've been doing this for, years. And I always say, if I ever become desensitized to another person's emotions, especially to another person's pain, that's the day that I stop being a journalist. And I tell people who express a desire to sort of want to follow, in my path or go down the road of, a war correspondent, that they need to know one thing, and that is that they will leave a piece of themselves with every single person whose story they cover, and you need to be okay with that, because you do. You leave a part of your heart, you leave a part of your soul behind with all of these people who you meet in all of these different horrific circumstances, and you need to be okay with that. And, of course, no, it's not. It's not easy to live with. But of course, yeah, no, yes, it is. But, at the same time, it's a choice. And one of the most surreal things in what we do is how quickly our own reality flips. Like I could have been in Syria, for example, back when the Russians and the Syrian regime were bombing Idlib province, which is right up against the border with Turkey. And we would pop across the border for 48 hours and, the bombs would be falling down, and we would be in the hospital next to mothers who were trying to hold it together for their injured children. And you're witnessing all of this, and you're witnessing people, fleeing the bombing, and children who were cold and hungry and scared, but they weren't crying because they were just so traumatized by everything that it felt as if they'd lost the ability to cry. And you're so deep into this, and you have the luxury of crossing the border over into Turkey, and just like that, you're in a hotel and you're safe, and you've got your hot shower and your cotton sheets, and the guilt that you carry with you. I mean, it's crushing.
I wonder how that changes your perspective when you come back to America from time to time and just, are in day-to-day life.
So over time, I think I have managed to, first of all, sort of, I still feel the guilt, but I also feel gratitude at what I have in life. It's made me, double down on my desire to tell people's stories, and the whole juxtaposition that I do see in different people's lives, like if I go back to the US or, any other country for that matter. That is actually what really drove me to start my charity, Inada, right, which I founded in 2015. And at the time, I was actually in a very sort of dark, emotional headspace. And the journalism, wasn't creating the kinds of, change that I had hoped and believed that journalism would. And I felt like we were failing on so many levels. We were failing as journalists, governments were failing. Humanitarian organizations were failing, and I had come across all these, injured children in war zones who needed medical help, and they weren't able to access it for a plethora of different reasons. And so I kind of, came up with this idea of creating a charity that would specifically target children who needed complex medical surgeries and mental health support that other organizations weren't able to reach. And it was actually doing that helped me.
Israel has been shelling Rafah, which it says is the last Hamas stronghold. That's, of course, where nearly half of Gaza's current population is residing, a city that's supposed to be the last safe place in Gaza. How devastating do you think this military action will be?
I think if it goes forward, it is going to, if it's even possible to imagine, eclipse what we've been seeing for the last 4 months in ways that we can't even begin to imagine. We heard Netanyahu talking about how, they want to move the population that's in Rafah right now. So we're talking 1.5 million people. He's floated the idea that, the IDF is looking into plans to move this population to the north. But, the north is mostly rubble. And to be able to humanely move that number of people, you need to, at the very least, be coordinating with humanitarian organizations to be able to pre-position shelter, food, water, medicine, access to basic services. And there is no coordination that is happening right now. And then there's something else that, isn't really part of the discussion, but it's not just, 1.5 million people that need to move. It is the entire humanitarian infrastructure that is currently supporting them that needs to be moved as well. All humanitarian aid organizations have their warehouses, their logistics, their trucks, their personnel in Rafah. That all somehow needs to move. You're basically asking humanitarian organizations to start from scratch and immediately somehow have this capacity to serve well over 1.5 million people, many of whom are sick, injured, hungry, either in famine or on the brink of famine. It's just, it's monumental, and it's also practically impossible. And when you think about the size of the bombs that Israel has been using and continues to use, and the population density in Rafah, I mean, my hair just stands on end right now.
And so what role do you think the United States, Canada, Western leadership has right now? And do you think that will have an impact on Israel? Because, Benjamin Netanyahu has said that he's going to destroy Hamas, whatever it takes.
Right. And so, we've heard harsher rhetoric coming out of the United States, but we've been hearing this for a little bit now, and it hasn't really impacted anything on the ground. I think Israel realizes right now, especially Netanyahu realizes right now, that they still have carte blanche to do whatever it is that they want to do. There is really only one thing that the United States and Western powers can do. And we are seeing, some Western powers beginning to take these measures, but that is to cut off the weapons tap. That's the only way that, Israel is going to begin to, I guess, pause and try to take a more measured approach, because rhetoric isn't working out. These conversations that, Blinken keeps having, and all these whirlwind trips around the Middle East, or phone calls between Biden and Netanyahu, they're not really shifting the intensity of the bombing campaign that we're seeing on the ground in Gaza. They're not actually resulting in the facilitation of more humanitarian aid being able to not just get into Gaza, but then be distributed within Gaza itself. They're not really resulting in the release of the hostages. I mean, yes, 2 hostages were rescued, but on the flip side of that, when there was a humanitarian pause, 100 hostages were released. And so I think it's the time right now where if countries really want to try to save Gaza, civilian population at least, much more serious action needs to be taken.
What will the impact be on children?
Look, I was in Cairo, and I was visiting some of the children that my charity Inada is working with in hospital. One child, 4 years old, very severe head injury, had lost the ability to speak. Another girl, she was in the hospital bed. She had no visible physical injuries. The doctors are running all sorts of tests on her, trying to see what was wrong. She can't move. She lost her mobility. And I share these 2 examples as examples of the severe and deep psychological trauma that children are going through. And the thing is when you have a situation like what's happening in Gaza, it's not just one traumatic event, right? It's repeated traumas coming at these children from different directions. And you have perhaps the ones that are more obvious, the trauma of the bombs and the constant state of fear. But then you also have the trauma of, mom and dad aren't there anymore. Or mom and dad, your parents that are meant to be your pillars of safety and stability, the people who you go to when you're scared and who are supposed to be able to protect you. The trauma of the realization that they can no longer protect you. The trauma of, being hungry and going to your parents and saying, Mom, I'm hungry, and your mom can't feed you, can't quench your thirst, can't make your pain go away, can't make your fever come down, can't treat your diarrhea, can't keep you safe. And so it's all these very different, levels of multitudes of trauma coming at these children, just about every single minute of every single day. But that's not to say that, these children should be discarded because they're going to be mentally scarred for the rest of their lives. No, yes, of course, they are going to be mentally scarred, but they can, with the right support, with the right therapy, learn to live with their injuries.
With all the work that you have done as a journalist, and now with this charity, with all the horrors that you've described even in this interview and that you've seen throughout your life, do you see hope here at the end for peace?
I mean, part of me feels like I need to say yes.
Yeah.
I think in some ways, collectively speaking, do I have hope for humanity? No, I don't. But does that mean that I stop fighting for what I believe in? And that is that every single human being deserves basically what I have, or, a safe, stable life? Yeah, absolutely. I will keep fighting for that, even if it's a lost cause. Because the minute we stop fighting for something better, that's when we guarantee our own self-destruction. So it's this strange juxtaposition of, do I have hope? No. But do I keep fighting? Yes.
There you go. Arwa Damon, thank you so much. Appreciate the time.